Hi, AP World History students. So this quick little recording here is just for those of you that were gone, or if you need some review about your assignment to compare and contrast China and their transition to communism. So I have my Venn diagram separated into two different slides just for the ease of display. So this first page here is talking about the revolution phase alone, just that phase where they're trying to overthrow old rule and establish communist rule. And so you can see here from my slide that I list similarities as in both cases in these revolutions that the West or Western nations tried to intervene on behalf of the liberal leaders and try to crush the communist resistors. In both cases, the outside powers failed. Both of these nations, both Russia, the USSR, and China, they had to go through two phases of overthrowing a king or emperor, and then there was an internal struggle about which way to go. So they essentially fought two wars or two struggles in order to become communist. They both had peasant unrest and unhappiness, and in both cases, they were disillusioned about their place in the world after World War I. Differences, and this is a key difference here I would describe this as a difference in application of communist theory. So in Russia, it's very pure, where the proletariat are these urban workers who are demanding better pay and better rights, and they're rebelling against the bourgeoisie, the factory owners, the land owners. But in China, the proletariat is interpreted much differently, and it has to be because China's not industrialized yet. So there is no urban working poor. So Mao is really selling communist ideology in a different way. He's like, look, first of all, to the peasants, he's reaching out and is saying, like, you are the ones being oppressed under the current abuses of the landlords and the nationalists. But eventually he extends this to all of the Chinese people and interprets the proletariat as the Chinese people themselves who are being oppressed and held back by Western powers and by outside intervention, and like European global order. And so he's really encouraging revolution against this global order that is oppressing the Chinese people. In Russia, it was fought by organized cells. In China, it was massive uprisings and struggles, so it was more widespread in China. In Russia, the bourgeoisie would be the czarists and the kulaks, or the landlords. In China, the bourgeoisie would be Western powers then, and their puppets. So, for example, Chiang Kai-shek. Russia had a quick revolution. China had a very long revolution. It took a very long time to accomplish that. And then, of course, having different leaders such as Lenin and later Stalin in Russia and Mao Zedong in China. My next slide here is just talking about the practice of communism itself. So once communism is established, what is similar, what is different? Well, you can see that the similarities column, we see a ton of similarities. The practice of collectivization, that is the state-owned and reorganized farmland. So stripping landlords, stripping peasants, even in China, of their ownership of the land, having 5-year plans to accomplish goals, the focus on heavy industry, the use of purges and persecution of opponents. They are both members of the Warsaw Pact, that's the new military alliance. They do suffer from lower production than the West. Both are using propaganda to both demonize the other side, the Western powers, and the bourgeoisie, and then also to promote their own cause. Both use censorship and control media. Both have secret police that are targeting opponents politically. Both struggle with environmental issues, dealing with pollution from the use of heavy industry and lack of oversight. And both are by doctrine atheist nations. So a lot of similarities in how communism is being carried out. Differences, USSR, quicker industrialization. I mean, they're already partially industrialized, but that the last push to refine further, that is happening more quickly in the USSR than it is in China. The USSR is seeing advances in science and space, and education, is a world superpower, whereas China is not a world superpower, at least yet, not until really the 1990s, and is not participating in the space race. So you might even have some accurate things that I don't have, so be confident if you found something that's not on here, it may very well be right. So let's talk about writing a comparative thesis. It's very, very important. a good way to do it is it's important that you're specific. Start with while or although. Again, it has to be specific. The biggest mistake I see is this one right here where people just have a very general statement. They had many similarities and many differences. That doesn't tell me anything. Remember, to get a point for your thesis statement, you have to have argumentation. You have to display the points that you're going to make in your thesis statement. So that is general. That gives me no idea what you're going to say. Better would be something like, although they had different political strategies, they had similar culture and economies. Okay, that's a step in the right direction. I kind of know where you're going, but I still don't have specifics. So I encourage you to refine your thinking a little bit and make sure that you have a specific example and lay out exactly what you're going to say. Don't overthink it. Do take time to think, how could I organize my thoughts? But then you just, as long as you tell your reader the main points that you're going to make, it's good. Okay, so there's no right or wrong way, just like the DBQ, there's no right or wrong way to group. So China, this would be one where you know exactly what I'm going to say. So I separated it by kind of phases, because to me that made sense. I said that they were more different in their revolutions, but once communism was established, they were actually very similar. Okay, so sorry I got interrupted, but as I look at this last one here, you can just tell very, very specifically what I'm going to say. So I'm thinking in my mind, and this just made sense for my brain, I'm thinking their revolutions are really very different. You know, how long it took, what their theory was about communism, but how they practice it is pretty similar. And I can explain that because China is being served at first, Mao Zedong is being served by Stalin, you know, and they're kind of borrowing the Soviet example, at least for a while. And so that's how I organized it. I said, China and the USSR experienced very different revolutions and interpreted communist theory differently. In the end, after communism was well established, China and the USSR were similar in that they used strong, brutal, and often violent tactics to accomplish the goals of the state. So one question you may have then is, well, how do I know what examples to use? Well, I'm choosing the most glaring examples, the biggest examples, and I'm also choosing to focus on maybe the topics where in my mind I can choose evidence for that. So if you have a Venn diagram with all these similarities and differences, and as you get into these compare and contrast topics, just remember that you don't have to address every single little last point. You are writing a narrative, so you're going to choose the things that are most important, most glaring, descriptive, things that you can provide evidence for, and if something is minor, you do not have to include it. So I hope that helps you. Do make sure that you revise your thesis statement and leave your revised assignment with the teacher that is in charge of class. I also won't be answering email this weekend, most likely. I am doing my son's graduation party, so if you need to get a hold of me for any reason, please do so today.